May 29th, 2025. A date that will likely be remembered as the tipping point for the American automotive industry. It didn't start with an explosion, but with a piece of paper. A blunt shareholder letter from General Motors that shattered the illusion of stability. The revelation was catastrophic. The new protectionist auto tariffs, designed politically to save American manufacturing, are now projected to cost GM up to $5 billion in a single year. The reaction was immediate and brutal. This wasn't just a red line on a balance sheet, it was a physical shutdown. From the assembly lines of Detroit to the supply hubs of Ontario, a terrifying silence has descended. Shift cuts, temporary layoffs, supplier bankruptcies. Wall Street responded by slashing forecasts, but on the factory floor, the calculation is much darker. We are witnessing a chain reaction that threatens to wipe out 50,000 jobs. The engine of American industry is stalling, choked by the very policies meant to fuel it. The question looming over the Rust Belt is no longer about profit margins, it is about survival. How long can the line stay quiet before the entire system snaps? Welcome to the analysis of the collapse. The narrative sold to the American public was simple. Tariffs were supposed to be a precision surgical tool. They were pitched as the lever that would pry factories away from foreign soil and replant them firmly in the Rust Belt. But the economic reality that struck in April 2025 wasn't surgery, it was a blunt force trauma. When the White House implemented a blanket 25% tariff on all imported vehicles and components, the impact on General Motors was instantaneous and devastating. Inside the Renaissance Center in Detroit, finance teams weren't just looking at red ink, they were looking at a hemorrhage. CEO Mary Barra delivered the grim news to shareholders. This policy wasn't saving the company. It was set to wipe out between $4 and $5 billion from 2025 earnings alone. To put that in perspective, that sum effectively evaporates the entire research and development budget for the Ultium battery platform, the very technology meant to secure GM's future. Washington attempted a course correction in late April, offering a bureaucratic olive branch, a meager 3% duty offset if final assembly occurred within the United States. But in the complex web of modern manufacturing, this was a drop of water in an inferno. The inconvenient truth is that even the most American vehicles in GM's lineup, the Silverado, the Equinox, the Escalade, are still heavily dependent on global trade. Most of these models rely on a supply chain where 40% of the parts are imported. You cannot simply switch off decades of globalization overnight without consequences. The math became impossible. When you combine these new tariffs with existing tariffs on steel and aluminum, the cost of production skyrocketed. Analysts estimate that every single truck rolling off the line now carries a $3,200 surcharge, a patriotism tax that simply didn't exist a year ago. The pain didn't start at the dealership. It started deep in the supply chain. Consider the humble steering knuckle. Overnight, the cost of this single component jumped from $28 to $36. Now multiply that price hike across 30,000 individual parts that make up a modern vehicle. It is a logistical nightmare. For a brief window, GM attempted to absorb the blow, hoping to shield consumers and maintain market share. But Wall Street has no patience for charity. As margins thinned, investors forced the company's hand, demanding mid-year price increases. The costs were passed down, the numbers stopped adding up, and the boardroom panic began to trickle down to the factory floor. But as we are about to see, when the spreadsheets turn red in Detroit, the lights go out in the heartland. To understand the true scale of this crisis, you have to pass past the scrolling tickers on CNBC and step onto the factory floors. The headlines scream about a nationwide shutdown, but those words are too sterile. They don't capture the reality. The reality is silence. A jarring, unnatural silence in places designed to be the loudest environments on Earth. The paralysis began on April 11th in Detroit. Ground zero was, fittingly, Factory Zero. Operations paused and 200 workers sent home. The official corporate line was slowing demand, a standard PR deflection. But on the floor, amongst the workers clocking out early, the whispers were different. They knew the truth. The cost of materials had become prohibitive. By late April, what started as a localized pause in Detroit had mutated into a contagious industrial freeze across the border. The Ingersoll Cami plant in Ontario, a critical hub for the Bright Drop van, slammed the brakes. Production was halted, not for a week, but until October. On May 2nd, 1,200 layoff notices went out. Simultaneously, the Oshawa Assembly, famous for its truck output, severed its overnight shift, instantly wiping out 700 jobs. The recruitment ads that once plastered local job boards vanished overnight. Now, all the only things filling the parking lots are empty trailers and unsold chassis. The damage didn't stop at the GM gates. The automotive ecosystem is a delicate organism, and the suppliers began to die off first. Adient, a major seat manufacturer, permanently shuttered 2 plants in Tennessee, slashing 400 union jobs in a single stroke. This is the hidden casualty count of a trade war. The smaller firms that lack the cash reserves to weather the storm. Executives in glass offices have coined a new sanitary term for this disaster. It's a phrase designed to calm investors, suggesting a temporary stretch that will eventually snap back to normal once the parts flow resumes. But for the local economies dependent on these plants, there is nothing elastic about it. It is a break. The economic bleed-out was immediate. In Michigan factory towns, local diners reported a 40% drop in customers literally overnight. In Indiana, small shop owners are already preparing to cut half their staff because the blue-collar disposable income that powers their businesses has evaporated. Wall Street, usually detached from the plight of the hourly worker, finally took notice of the ghost towns forming in the Midwest. They responded with cold calculation, cutting 18% off GM's outlook. The market realized what the workers already knew. Elastic idling is just a polite way of saying the system is broken. And as the factories went dark, the lights also began to flicker on America's most ambitious project, the electric vehicle revolution. For 2 years, General Motors positioned itself as the tip of the spear in America's electric revolution. The strategy was all in. But in the spring of 2025, that spear hit a concrete wall. We're watching the collision between political ambition and market reality, and the wreckage is piling up at Factory Zero. The collapse of the EV strategy wasn't a slow decline. It was triggered by 3 distinct dominoes falling in rapid succession. First, the $7,500 federal EV tax credit, the life support system for consumer demand, was repealed. Second, Congress froze funding for the national charging network. And finally, the fatal blow, the new tariffs hit battery minerals. In a twist of cruel irony, the policies meant to secure American energy independence simply inflated the cost of the Ultium platform to unsustainable levels. The result is visible from the air. Factory Zero, once the bustling poster child of the future, has transformed into a parking lot of despair. It is packed with rows of unsold Silverado EVs sitting under plastic sheets, gathering dust while their lithium-ion hearts slowly degrade in the storage heat. Internal data paints a bleak picture of the American consumer. Interest in EVs has plummeted from 14% to just 7% the moment the incentives vanished. Even desperate measures like offering 0% financing have failed to move the needle. Buyers are looking at rising insurance premiums, spiking electricity rates, and a charging infrastructure that has stopped growing. They're not buying the future anymore. They are returning to gasoline. The numbers inside the boardroom are terrifying. GM CFO Paul Jacobson recently admitted the brutal arithmetic. The company needs to sell 100,000 Ultium trucks annually just to break even on the program. The 2025 forecast? A pathetic 65,000.
Do the math. Every unsold EV sitting on a lot represents $45,000 in tied-up capital that GM cannot access. The company is now paying to store vehicles that are depreciating by the day. As GM throttles production and prays for cheaper batteries that may never come, the big question looms. Was the EV transition a massive strategic overestimation, or was it simply choked to death by the very government that demanded it? The dream isn't just deferred, it is being liquidated. The solidarity of the assembly line has fractured. Detroit shop floors, once united by badge pride and union brotherhood, have devolved into a battleground where the casualty is cohesion. The trade war hasn't just disrupted supply chains, it has triggered a civil war within the labor movement itself. The schism is geopolitical. On one side, UAW President Shawn Fain has publicly framed the administration's tariffs as a necessary, painful step to finally put American jobs first. On the other side of the border, Unifor, representing the Canadian workforce, is screaming betrayal. They accuse General Motors of sacrificing Canadian livelihoods to score political points in Tennessee. The border between Detroit and Windsor is no longer just a river, it is a fault line. For the individual worker, the situation is a psychological trap. Mortgage bills are blurring the old battle lines. A worker in Michigan faces an impossible choice. Support the tariffs, and you are actively starving your colleagues in Ontario. Oppose them, and you risk being labeled unpatriotic in a polarized political climate. Management is watching this friction with calculated indifference. Divided workers rarely unite effectively against corporate cost-cutting. While the unions argue over ideology, the hourly workers are facing the reality of elastic idling. Supplemental pay might cover 75% of wages, but overtime, the bloodline of a blue-collar budget, has vanished. The atmosphere inside the plants is heavy with the ghosts of the past. Every idle day feels like a terrifying déjà vu of the Lordstown closure in 2019. Toolboxes are being packed and left by the doors, a silent preparation for the end. Adding insult to injury is the political theater radiating from Washington. The administration has offered no lifeline. President Trump has shrugged off GM's $5 billion plight with a cold Darwinian assessment. They made their supply chain choices, now they must live with them. There is no bailout coming, just a stark warning to adapt or sink. The slogans that sounded so good at rallies are now ringing hollow in the empty break rooms of Michigan. General Motors' bleeding is merely the prologue. The tariff contagion has escaped Detroit and is now infecting every major automotive artery in the Northern Hemisphere. Stellantis is reeling. At the Windsor Assembly, the last stronghold of the minivan, production has turned into a chaotic roller coaster. The instability has triggered 900 layoffs across Indiana and Michigan. Midwest dealer lots are overflowing with unsold Pacificas, yet prices continue to climb. Why? Because the tariffs have inflated the cost of the Chinese subcomponents hidden deep within the chassis. The heavy-duty sector is also buckling. Volvo Group North America is bracing to cut 1,000 workers in Pennsylvania and Virginia. The math is brutal. Fleet buyers are walking away from rigs that now cost $180,000, a staggering $15,000 jump over their overseas counterparts. But the fear is most palpable in Seoul. GM Korea, which exports 88% of its output to the United States, is staring at an existential threat. Executives there fear a repeat of the 2017 Australian exit, a total collapse of operations. Meanwhile, Hyundai and Kia are frantically trying to accelerate construction in Alabama and Georgia, but concrete takes time to cure. Those new American jobs won't arrive until 2027. The crisis is now. The absurdity of the supply chain is exposed at the border. Consider a single piston cast in Mexico. In the modern assembly process, that piston might cross the US-Mexico border 3 times before it's installed in a finished engine. Under the new regime, each crossing is a tariff risk event. It's death by 1,000 cuts. One Ontario supplier lost $1.2 million in a single week due to a customs paperwork error. So how does this end? Inside GM's Ringsend HQ, planners have sketched out 3 classified scenarios. Scenario 1, the stabilization. This is the optimistic path. By late June, supply lines reroute. Wiring looms arrive from Brazil. engines flow back from Mexico. Silverado output recovers, and EV lines hold steady at the cautious 65,000 unit forecast. Margins remain razor-thin, but the company survives the year without a credit downgrade. Scenario 2. The quagmire. July brings a second wave of tariffs, this time targeting Japanese and Korean electronics. The cost of infotainment modules skyrockets. Plant utilization dips further as Washington gridlock stalls any relief. Whispers of credit downgrades turn into shouts. Scenario 3. The collapse. This is the nightmare scenario. China retaliates by cutting off the supply of rare earth minerals. Without these elements, parts vanish, and ultrium production halts completely. Factories in the US and Canada go dark indefinitely. GM's debt outlook sours, and the morale of the workforce breaks. 3 levers will decide which future becomes reality: policy, demand, and supply chain resilience. GM is currently tightening its belt to save billions, but against a $5 billion tariff gap, those savings are just a drop in the ocean. Tariffs were sold to the American public as a shortcut to industrial dominance, a way to force jobs back home. Instead, they have engineered a self-inflicted stalemate. We are left with idled plants, shattered supply chains, and thousands of families hanging in the balance of a geopolitical gamble. If policy softens and demand returns, the assembly lines might roar back to life. But if the credit crunch persists and the trade war escalates, this silence in Detroit won't be a pause, it will be a permanent scar. The question remains, is this the necessary pain of progress, or is it simply economic suicide?